Several years ago, I read a book called Who Moved My Cheese? A very, very interesting small book dealing with the subject of change, how that we must learn to change in life. The word cheese that we're talking about here it's whatever brings fulfillment in our lives. It causes us to be a happy person, a contented, fulfilled person. So that's what we mean when we talk about cheese. It's whatever brings fulfillment in our life. It's finding our place in life and utilizing our gifts for productive living. I think that's a very good way of saying it. Finding your place, knowing where God wants you to be, understanding how He created you, what your gifts and talents are, and living a fulfilled life. Now, I'm going to touch on several different things here on moving our cheese, how that life is a journey. We're going somewhere. It's a journey. So let me give you some different points. Here's point number one. Having cheese makes us happy. In other words, we become contented. Contented with ourselves, contented with life, contented that we know we are doing what God created us to do. Now, here's the problem for too many people. We tend to lose our personal identity in whatever positions we hold. Now, I think this is an occupational hazard for all of us. I deal with pastors all the time, and I know it's certainly a problem for pastors that so many people, pastors, that they've lost their identity with their position. In other words, if you took away being pastor, they're nobody. That's not true. That is not true at all. You were to be a man or woman of God before God ever called you to be pastor. That's just the position that you hold. But we tend to do this. We tend to lose our identity in the position that we hold, and that is a mistake. Mistaking our position as cheese causes us to become possessive and protective of it. Oh, I hope you understand what I'm saying here, because so many problems in life occur because of this very reason. We're forgetting something. Jesus said in Luke 12:15, one's life does not consist in the abundance of things he possesses. And that's not just natural things, it's also positions that we have. It's all the education, whatever. No, we're much greater than those positions that we have. Your life is much more than that. And you've got to understand, you've got to find your place in God and fulfill the gifts that He's given you. See, the more important cheese becomes to us, the more we try to hold on to it. We don't want anything to change. We're afraid we're going to lose something. And, of course, we're setting ourselves up for terrible conflict. We start trying to preserve the past. But the truth is, the only things that can successfully be preserved are dead. We don't want our relationships to be dead. We don't want our marriage to be dead. We don't want our relationship with God to be dead, our church to be dead. No. But do you see what happens when we start trying to preserve the past? We end up killing the very thing that gave us life. I make this statement many times. Some people would rather die than change, and they usually do. I've seen that happen to people. I've seen it happen to towns. I've seen it happen to churches. It doesn't have to be that way. God is the God of life, not the God of the dead. And He wants us to have life. He doesn't want your marriage to die. So you've got to learn how to grow, how to move with the cheese. If we don't change, then we will become extinct. It would be very foolish, for instance, in my own personal life, for me to act like I am a young man. How foolish. Oh, yes, one time I was a young man, but I'm not a young man anymore. I have to learn how to adapt and how to change with life. If I don't, then I kill the very thing that I'm trying to be. God help us not to do that. Change is inevitable, and it's impossible to stop. It will happen either with you or without you. But life is a journey. It's going somewhere, and we've got to learn how to move with the cheese. It's a mistake to think that we can continue to successfully repeat the past. As I mentioned, at one time I was a young man. I can remember when I actually thought people that took a nap in the afternoon was lazy. Oh, man, I've reached the point where I realize now what the prophet meant. Old men shall dream dreams. I mean, how am I going to dream a dream unless I take a nap? But see, that is the change that takes place, and you've got to learn to move with it. All right, the second thing that I want to talk about in Who Moved My Cheese is learn to monitor change. Now, here's what I mean by monitoring change. Smelling the cheese often helps us know when it's getting old. Oh, yes. You don't just ignore it. No, go back and smell it again. Go, take it out of the refrigerator. You might have some mold on that cheese, you know. You need to investigate it. So smelling the cheese often helps us know when it's beginning to get old. Here's a good question to help us to do this. What would we do if we were not afraid? Now, that's a good question. A good question for any area of our life. What would we do if there was no fear? And then what is stopping you from pursuing the dream that you have? This is smelling the cheese. In Romans, the 14th chapter, in verse 23, the Apostle Paul says, "He who doubts is condemned. For whatsoever is not of faith is sin." Now, I don't know what that verse does to you, but that verse, it's like a reality check for me. I mean, that one sets me back in my seat, and I have to stop and think, now, wait a minute. Am I reacting to problems, or am I a man of faith? Am I believing God, or am I just hiding from my fears? He who doubts is condemned. That's not God. That's coming from the devil. He goes on to say the reason because whatever is not of faith is sin. Learn to follow your faith. What would you do if you were not afraid? Now, here's a good statement. The fear of making mistakes paralyzes our faith and causes us to miss good opportunities for making positive change. How many times we've been caught in this trap? This trap of, I'm afraid I'll make a mistake. Well, you just made one. I remember years ago in Kansas City, there was a lady that she's driving, and the street divides when it comes to a railroad crossing. There's this huge concrete pillar right in the middle of the road. There's flashing arrows on both sides pointing to the lanes, and she hits the concrete pillar right in the center. The policeman said, "Ma'am, couldn't you see that pillar?" She said, "I couldn't make up my mind which way I wanted to go." Now, it's a humorous way of stating it, but haven't we all been there? And because we were afraid we would make a mistake, we just made the mistake. We missed the opportunity. Don't do that. That is not God that is leading you in this way. The truth is, life is an adventure. You never know what's around the corner. And some of us, we're always afraid, the cat's going to eat the mouse. You might be surprised. The cat may want to play. And there's nothing like that kind of an adventure. You don't know the opportunities that God will give you if you will learn to move past your fears. So learn to anticipate change by observing the signals that are taking place around you. There are. They're there. They're there constantly. Things are changing because life is a journey. It's going somewhere. And we need to learn how to read the signals. There's a good statement in Psalm 90 and verse 9 where Moses says, "We spend our years as a tale that is told." That's a good way of saying it. In other words, we are living out the story. When I wrote my autobiography, that's what I wanted to call it, Living the Dream. Because that's exactly what I'm doing. Attempting to do is follow the God-given dream. Follow what it is that God has put in your heart. It doesn't matter how impossible it seems, how ridiculous it seems. I don't want my story to end up, he came and ate a cheeseburger and choked to death. I haven't got any aspirations for that. I want my last moments to be my greatest moments. I want to go out like Elijah in a chariot of fire. I can't think of anything better than that. So learn to follow after your faith. We've got to learn to move beyond our fears or we're in bondage. The only thing that can set us free is follow your faith. Follow your faith in God that God has given to you. Fear robs us of God's promises and it makes us its slave. And I have seen so many people that never even began to come close to living their potential because they always cautiously hiding behind their fears. Don't do that, my friend. God challenges us. The Apostle Paul put it this way in 2 Timothy 1:7 when he said, God has not given us a spirit of fear. So if God hasn't given us a spirit of fear, then don't let anybody else give one to you. I remember it's only been a few years ago now that we were getting ready to turn the big one to the year of 2000. Does anybody ever remember the millennial bug? Oh, the Y2K bug. And I got so tired of that junk. Even preachers got on that bandwagon, Oh, man, the world was going to stop and all our computers were going to die and we wasn't going to, you remember that? And I remember saying, God hasn't given me a spirit of fear. I'm not about to let a preacher give me one. And I can remember my son-in-law Vince and I, we were out in the garage. It was on getting right after Christmas, just before the New Year's of Y2K. And there was a great big old beetle. Flew in there, I tell you, and flew in the light of that garage. And man, I stepped on him and smashed him. I had started hollering for Evelyn. Come, honey, come quick. Hurry. She comes and says, I just killed the Y2K bug. You don't have to be afraid. Of course, she said, you're crazy, but hey, enjoy the journey, friend. Enjoy the journey. God hasn't given us a spirit of fear. Fear destroys the future before it arrives. And how tragic that so many people live in the prison of fear. I'm not going to do that. Here's the third thing I want to talk about in Who Moved My Cheese? Anticipate the change. In other words, it's going to come. Change is going to happen either with you or without you. It's going to happen, my friend, because life is on a journey. It's going somewhere. So learn how to read the signals, how to anticipate the change. Develop an attitude of faith, a positive attitude toward life. Get ready for the cheese to move. Now, I'm not sure just where it's going, but I know one thing. It's going. It's moving. Life's not going to stop for you, for me, or anybody else. It's going to continue to move. And we've got to get ready for the cheese to move. Good leaders do this. Good leaders are always looking for ways to make improvements. Someone has well said, the largest room in the whole world is the room for improvement. And that is true. That is true. The best is yet to come. And yet, too many people trying to live in the past, they're afraid of tomorrow. That isn't God, my friend. That is not a spirit of faith. So always be looking around you. Anticipate the changes that are going to take place. See, good leaders are this way. Good leaders are more concerned with stagnation than they are with making mistakes. I must confess to you, one of the things that I fear is standing before God and giving an account that he says, why didn't you do more? You know why? We're afraid we'll make a mistake. We were afraid to take the chance. We were afraid to take the step of faith. And as I said, this fear of making a mistake is a mistake. Every good leader makes mistakes. You go and search through history. Every millionaire, for the most part, over 75% of all millionaires have been bankrupt more than once. Why? Because they were willing to take the chance. I remember years ago, an associate pastor on my staff said to me, Dale, you will always accomplish more for God than I will because you're willing to take the chance. And he was right. That's what faith involves. It's trusting God enough to take the risk. See, for good leaders, good people that's learning, that's growing, that has fulfilled lives, life is a school from which they will never graduate. I never intend to graduate. Don't graduate from school. Graduate to the next level of learning, the next level of fruitfulness, the next level of spirituality, the next level. In other words, too many people, they think of graduation as that certificate they've got on their wall that says they have this degree, they're Dr. So-and-so. No. A good education is simply learning how to learn. You never graduate from that school. They imagine themselves as enjoying the new cheese even before they find it. And what does that help them? It helps lead you to it. When you're sniffing the air, all of us have seen the pictures, and if you've not seen in person, it's something. The little mouse, when he first catches that whiff of the cheese, his head will go up, and I mean those whiskers start moving, and he can smell it. It is there. That's the way we must be with life. We must be smelling the cheese because that will help lead us to it. It's what we call a sanctified imagination. A sanctified imagination. Someone has well said, we don't stop playing because we grow old. Rather, we grow old because we stop playing. I love to be around children because their imaginations are so fantastic. I mean, those little minds they can make a game out of anything. They're just constantly. Don't lose that sanctified imagination that allows the Holy Spirit to give you happy, faith-filled thoughts. And the truth is, we can find cheese in the most unlikely places. For instance, in my life, one of the places I discovered cheese was in Chiapas, Mexico. The poorest state in Mexico, the farthest from the United States, but the cheese that I found in Chiapas. I love these two verses of Scripture. In Jeremiah, in the Old Testament, the prophet says, "For I know the thoughts that I think toward you, says the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you a future and a hope." The Apostle Paul said something very similar to this. In the book of Philippians, he says, "Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are noble, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there is any virtue, if there is anything praiseworthy, think on these things." Paul wrote that from a prison cell. The prophet Jeremiah wrote those words when Babylon had come in and destroyed his land, and yet they are faith-filled words. God help us to become men and women of faith. Let me give you the fourth thing that I see, and Who moved my cheese? Adapt to change quickly. In other words, life's not going to sit and wait for you. It's going to keep moving. You've got to learn to move quickly. The more quickly we let go of the old cheese, the more quickly we can enjoy the new cheese. The problem with trying to relive the past is it'll never be the past again. It will never be 1995 again. See, and they talk about the good old days. Yes, 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 but here's the principle. Good becomes the enemy of the best. You've got to learn to live your life that way, expecting the best is yet to come. That's what Jesus promised. See, a good past can destroy a better future. For instance, like grandparenting. There's no way that young people can understand this. But the truth is, they call them grandbabies because they are grand. There is nothing in life that can describe that to you. And as one man said, if I had known they were so great, I'd have had them first. See, this is the problem. A good past can destroy a better future. The harder we try to hold on to the past, the more difficult it becomes for us to move into the future. Now, because life moves on what we're going to call small wheels, it's the little things in life. We miss the signals. But the truth is, they are continually around us, all around us, all the time. Life is changing. We've got to learn to read the signals. Good leaders learn to read the signals, and they make the necessary adjustments to reach a productive future. You can do it. That's what God intends for you if you don't try to hold on to the past. Noticing these small changes early helps us to adapt to the bigger changes that are coming. For instance, this is one of the problems I've seen for many people when they come to the big decisions. They can't make them because there is no momentum. For instance, if there was a gap between me and something for 6 foot, for instance, there's no way I can stand at one side of that and just jump flat-footed 6 feet. I can't do it. But it is possible. I got to get way back over there and start running and run as fast as I can. And then when I get to that edge, make a flying leap and I can clear it because my momentum will carry me through. That's what we have to do. By taking these small, successful steps, we are growing in confidence that will prepare us for tomorrow's opportunities. So when the big one comes along, we have faith enough to take that step because we have continually been making the successful little steps. Let me give you the 5th thing that I see in moving my cheese. Learn to move with the cheese. In other words, life's going somewhere, either with you or without you. It's going. It's a mistake for a leader to simply watch and see if things will improve. No. Why do you think God put us in positions of leadership? He puts us there to make decisions. By doing nothing, we're actually creating bigger problems. We need to be finding solutions to make it a better world, make it a better family, a better home, a better marriage. We got to continually be moving in the right direction. Good leaders must continually be searching for new ideas to create a positive atmosphere for good things to happen. For instance, one of the principles I've lived by for years is people will talk, so to give them good things to talk about. Because if you don't give them good things, guess what? They'll be talking about something they shouldn't be talking about. This is what you have to do. Now, the old ideas that we had, they were good in the past. They were good ideas. But the old ideas will not lead us to new cheese. No, we've got to learn to move with the cheese. We must not allow our minds to grow old and isolate ourselves from a changing world. Oh, I wish I could say it better than that. God help us, but too many people have already allowed their minds to grow old. Now here's a good statement. Methods are many, principles are few. Principles never change. Methods always do. You ought to memorize that. That ought to become one of the principles that you live by in life. Methods are always going to be changing. And so the last thing that I want to talk about is enjoy the change. And learn to enjoy life. The Bible said that Jesus was anointed with the oil of gladness. Not madness, not no, gladness. Jesus is a happy Jesus. So learn to savor the adventure and enjoy the taste of new cheese, of doing something you've never done before. See, there's two basic things that usually promote change in our life. Either pain or promise. The truth is, it's better to be led by the promise of a better tomorrow than to be forced to change by the pain of remaining the same. Someone has well said, you will change when the pain of remaining the same becomes greater than the pain of changing. I don't want to live that way, though. I want to learn to live by the promise of a better tomorrow. And so I challenge you. Who moved my cheese? I don't know. I just know it's moving. Change will happen. It's going to happen because they keep moving the cheese. So let's learn to move with it. I want to share with you some thoughts on principles of church growth. I was reading the story of Jesus multiplying the loaves and fishes, and suddenly it dawned on me, and these are church growth principles. So I want to share some thoughts with you. I'm going to start reading from Mark, the 6th chapter, and verse 35. When the day was now far spent, his disciples came to him and said, "This is a deserted place, and already the hour is late. Send them away that they may go into the surrounding country and villages and buy themselves bread, for they have nothing to eat." But he answered and said to them, "You give them something to eat." And they said to him, "Shall we go and buy 200 denarii? Denarii was actually 1 day's wages in their culture. "Shall we buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give them something to eat?" He said to them, "How many loaves do you have? Go and see." And when they went and found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then he commanded them to make all to sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in ranks, in hundreds and in 50s. And when he had taken up the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven, blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples to set before them. And the 2 fish he divided among them all. So they all ate and were filled. And they took up 12 baskets full of fragments of the fish. And those that had eaten were about 5,000 men. Now, let's look at this principles of church growth. It's amazing how that Jesus will do something like this, a miracle, and we will sit and look at that and never realize the practical things that he is teaching us. And so this story of Jesus multiplying the loaves and fishes gives us 6 principles that I want to talk about. Here's the first one: growth through vision. What do you see? It said the people, when they saw the multitudes, they said, "Send them away." That's the wrong response. That's a wrong response. Now, the truth is, churches don't grow because we don't want them to grow. Now, we would never say it that way. No, we're much too polite and cultured for that. But the truth is, many times we are like the disciples. Send them away. I remember one teacher telling me that she was teaching 4-year-olds, and she said, "Don't bring me any more 4-year-olds," because she had so many already in her class. And so what we see is important. Jesus didn't see it that way. The disciples, for instance, saw the people as a problem. As long as you see them as a problem, you're going to be saying, "Send them away." But Jesus said they don't need to go away. What he saw was completely different than what the disciples saw. This is what we call becoming inclusive, drawing people in. Always have open arms. It's like I say of Jesus, that he opened his arms wide on the cross and said, "Whosoever will." Don't become exclusive, trying to force everybody out. This is our church. Oh my, that attitude has created so many churches to stop growing. They become exclusive rather than inclusive. Now, the second thing I want to talk about is what I'm going to call growth through planning. It's a good statement that churches don't grow because we can't find any more people like us. We've already found all the ones that we can like us. Now, if we're going to grow, we're going to have to accept people that are not like us. And that becomes challenging to every one of us. These disciples had already given up on the multitude without even checking their resources. You hear what Jesus said. He said, "How many loaves do you have?" They hadn't any idea how many loaves they had. So he said, "Go and see. Go find out." It's amazing the resources that we have that God has given to us, but we don't utilize it. In fact, the wise man in the book of Proverbs said, "There is much in the house of the poor, but he wastes it." In other words, he doesn't know how to utilize the gifts and talents that God has given to him. That's these disciples. They're ready to send them away, and they don't even know what resources they have. So Jesus said, "Go find out what you have before you start sending anyone off." It's a good statement. To fail to plan is to plan to fail. Now that's more than just a cliche. And so many people, because they've never taken the time to even find out what their gifts are, what their talents are, what we can do, they're already dismissing people and saying, "We can't do anything. What can we do?" Oh, I've heard that so many times. I've been ministering in churches, and pastors would get up and they'd start telling their people, "We wish we could bless this brother, but I know you're just poor people and we don't have any money." And I'm sitting there thinking, I just want to scream and say, "Would you just pass the offering plate and hush?" I mean, you're trying to talk them out of it before you don't know the resources that you have until you investigate. See, to grow a church, we've got to help our people grow. For instance, number one, help them discover their spiritual gifts. The greatest resources that any church has is not loaves and fishes. It's the little boy that's carrying the loaves and fishes. It's the people that you have. That's the greatest resources that God has given to any church. So help them discover what is their gifts. What is it that God has talented them with? Number two, train them for service. Help them take the gifts that they have and begin to put that to use. Start doing something with those gifts. And then number three is release them for ministry. I found this is what good leadership, good pastoring is about. Getting the right people with the right training, and then you release them, put them in the right place, and let them do their job. That's what it's all about. And so when we help people discover their gifts and train them, then release them to do the job of ministry. The third principle that I find in this story is what I'm going to call growth through organization. Now, this is similar to the planning, but it's the next step. You start bringing order to it. You start coming up with a systematic plan how you're going to accomplish it. For instance, it may be impossible to feed 5,000 men. We don't know how many women and children were there. We know there were some children because it was the little boy that had the 5 loaves and 2 fish. So we don't know how many was in this multitude. You can estimate it all the way up to 10 to 15,000. And I think that's a fair estimate. But you may not be able to feed 5,000, but you can feed 50. And that's what Jesus is saying. Make them sit down in groups of 100s and groups of 50s. Make them sit down. Notice the terminology. They're going to resist this. Why? And anytime you start trying to organize people, they're going to have questions. Why do you want us to do this? Now, how do you do it? You have to help them see the benefits of the organization. Just simply say to them, sit down in groups here. We're going to start feeding some fish sandwiches. And, everybody wants a fish sandwich. Okay, we'll just sit down over here. 50 in this group, 100 over here. And you start organizing it. You help them see the benefits that's going to come if they will sit down in these groups. Now, it's one of the basic reasons why churches don't grow. We aren't willing to pay the price to fix the things that are wrong. For instance, in this story, you can't feed 10,000 people, 5,000 men. It's too big a task. But you can feed 1, you can feed 10, you can feed 50. And so that's what Jesus does. He starts telling them, and he tells the disciples, you need to do this. He doesn't do it himself. He gives them the order. You go out and do it. You can do this. So put them in groups of 50, put them in groups of 100. Now, something you've got to note here on Jesus' part, Jesus had planned ahead before he starts organizing by locating a large grassy area. Now, why does he do that? We read over this so many times and don't pay attention to it, but it said there was a lot of grass in that area. Why? Because people don't like sitting in the dirt. They dislike that. And so you got to look ahead, plan ahead, and that's the reason he chose this large grassy area. And if you ever go to Israel, they'll take you to the place that they say, this is where Jesus did it. And it probably is. It is a sloping hillside, because after Jesus feeds them, and feed them first and get them calmed down, and then he teaches them. He's going to give them instruction, and that's where the Sermon on the Mount took place. And he gives them this basic concept for living. But it would have never happened if he hadn't have led them to the large grassy area on this hillside where they made them sit down. So, with churches, in churches, every church needs 2 types of groups. We need large groups, we need small groups. Both are very important. You cannot do away with either one. It's the very reason why so many small churches will always be small, is because there is nothing challenging, nothing large. What do you do if you got a small church? Find another person that's got a small church. Find 2 or 3 that's got a small church. And I said it over and over again. Small churches can do anything that big churches can do if they will do 2 things. Number 1, you got to plan ahead. Plan ahead. It's not going to happen this week. You got to start thinking 6 months or a year from now. Plan ahead. Number 2, you got to work with other people. So if all you've got is a small church, then start working in harmony with other groups, because one is too small of a number to be of any significance. But then, as it grows larger, the large groups, they give significance to what we're doing. That's where we challenge the people. We help them see a bigger picture. But the small groups are where the personal needs are met. Notice, nobody got fed in the multitude of 5,000. It was only when they become small groups of 50s and 100s. That's where the feeding takes place. And the same is true in our churches. We need the large group because that challenges us. We get a bigger picture. We get a global picture, an international picture, and we begin to see the kingdom of God. But our personal needs are going to be met in the small group. That's why God has designed the family, where a man and a woman in a covenant of love, babies are born in that. Babies are not born to the multitudes. They're always born to couples in love. And God did that because the baby's needs will be provided in the small group. The same is true with church growth. Now, here's the fourth thing I want to talk about in this story. It's what I'm going to call growth through devotion. Now, let me help you understand by asking a question. What should we give to Jesus? The answer to that, the right answer is, give him everything. Whatever you've got. If you've only got 5 loaves and 2 fishes, give it all to Jesus. There's so many people, I've had people do this to me for, I can't tell you how many years. Walk up, I wish I had $1 million. I would bless your ministry, and it's never helped me 2 cents worth. You know why? They're not willing to give me the $20 they do have. And this is what we're talking about. Growth through devotion. Whatever you've got, give it to Jesus. He'll work miracles with it. He will do something supernatural if you give it to him. Churches fail to grow because we don't experience God's supernatural, miraculous power. There's got to be something that happens that we say, God is in this place. This is not just people. This is God at work. And suddenly, that gives significance to everything that we are doing. So it's what I'm calling growth through devotion. Now, the truth is, God can only multiply the things that we give to him. The little boy's got 5 loaves and 2 fish, but not going to be a whole lot's going to happen with that until you give it to Jesus. You give it to Jesus, you never know what Jesus will do with what you have. He can take it and turn it into something supernatural. He blessed it. That's the first thing, and it's very important that he blesses it, because if he doesn't bless it, you can't experience the second part. He broke it. You'll never be able to stand the breaking without the blessing. And then the third thing, he gave it. Now notice this. He gave it back to the disciples. Jesus did not directly feed any of these 5,000 men, plus the women and children. No. He delegated that, he assigned that to his disciples to do it. They could not do the multiplication, only he could do that. But they could feed them. And so he starts giving them the baskets full of food and say, take that over those 50. There's 100 over there. Peter, take that over there to them. And they start feeding the multitude. Now, this is what God will do within our lives if we will give it all to Jesus. Give it all to him. And you will be amazed at the supernatural things that he will do in your life. The fifth thing I want to talk about here is what I call growth through follow-up. Growth through follow-up. Now, you find this particular principle in the book of John, the 6th chapter, where it tells the same story about Jesus multiplying the loaves and fish. And it says in verse 12, John, the 6th chapter, He said, gather up the fragments that remain so that nothing be lost. Now, this is one of the mistakes that I see that is made by so many churches. Jesus was concerned about what other people would call the scraps, the leftovers. Somebody didn't eat the whole piece of bread. Somebody didn't eat all the fish. So Jesus said, gather them up. They started gathering them up, and they found out they had more left over than they even began with. Now, that's what we call the leftovers or the scraps. Jesus was very interested. It's what we would say, never be careless with a miracle. God's doing something supernatural here. Don't take that lightly. When God is at work within your life, never treat that like it's just the scraps, the leftovers. That is not important. And I found that that's one of the reasons why churches don't grow. They fail in the follow-up. See, the truth of it is, in every church it's this way. There are always people that are thinking about leaving. Always. It's many times it's something that's personal in their own life. It may be a conflict with someone else, but it doesn't have to be that. It can just be a personal struggle, and they're looking for answers. They don't think they're finding them there. One of the worst things that can happen to any churches don't grow because people don't think we care. We've got to find ways that we communicate. You're not a leftover. You're not just a scrap. You're not a nobody. It's not just the little kids that, everybody is important in the family. And we must communicate that. And so Jesus said, don't allow any of the scraps to go to waste. Gather up all the fragments that remain. What we've got to do is learn to turn our church into a circle of love that embraces other people's needs. In other words, always be looking out for your brother, for your sister, looking out for whatever is going on in their life, and reach out to them and let them know we care. We missed you. We care about you. You are important to us. Don't let anybody put you down and you think and tell you you're just a little person, a nobody. That's not true. There are no nobodies in the kingdom of God. There are none. Everybody is important. And so Jesus said, gather up the fragments that remain. See, love will cause people to draw closer rather than to pull away. That's one of the most important things that we can communicate. It's more than a cliche, it is the truth. Nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. Well, that is not a cliche. That is the gospel truth. And God help us to be able to communicate that to people everywhere. Now, the sixth principle that I see here in this story goes back to the 6th chapter of the book of Mark. And in the 6th chapter, in verse 52, you drop on down, and they've fed the multitudes, they've gotten in a boat, and they're crossing over the sea. A storm comes up, and Jesus calms the water. But it says in verse 52, speaking of the disciples, they had not understood about the loaves. In other words, about this miracle of feeding the multitude, because their heart was hardened. Now that's a very interesting verse, and it goes back to this miracle. They did not understand about the miracle of feeding the multitude, the loaves and fishes, because their heart was hardened. Now the question is, What does a miracle have to do with a hard heart? How can you connect those two together? Well, it's very simple once you think about it. The truth is, miracles are exhausting work. They will work you down. In other words, feeding the first 50 people, oh, that's fun. That's exciting. I mean, to see these people, they're saying, where did you get this food? Jesus is doing it. It's a miracle. It's exhilarating. The adrenaline is pumping. And I mean, everybody's excited. But guess what? You not only have 50, there's another 50 and another 50. And there are 550s. There's 1,050s. And suddenly the fun's gone because your tongue's hanging out. You're tired. You are exhausted. Now, what you have to learn is you've got to learn how to delegate. Churches stop growing because they fail to delegate. And they keep operating by the same principles they operated by when they were small. But now suddenly it's growing. And what are we going to do? You're going to have to change the way that you operate. You've got to involve more people in this. What Peter should have done, instead of trying to feed 5,000 alone, or however many he tried to feed alone, and we know that Peter, his personality, I'm sure he was gung-ho. He was so excited. But no. After a while, after these folks, what about these 50 men? They had their fish sandwiches first. They finished a while ago. Come here, help me. And you start take that over there to that group. And you start delegating it to some new workers who now get involved in the miracle. They're just as excited as you were when you first started. But if you keep trying to do it alone, you're going to burn out. See, the ministry of the church must grow along with the greater crowds. If it doesn't, you'll burn out in ministry. It's impossible for us to meet the needs of a growing congregation unless we are willing to share the responsibilities of ministry and let somebody else help us do the job. If we're willing to do that, then we can keep ministering to more and more people. But if we're not willing to do that, and that's where a lot of people, it becomes, this is my church, and they become possessive of whatever position that they have. That is a mistake. We become so preoccupied with meeting the needs of the present that we fail to plan ahead for the needs of the future. That is a mistake. And so Jesus is teaching them, don't allow your heart to become hardened. See, most burnout in ministry comes from loss of vision. We're not looking ahead. We're not seeing the big picture. If we will continue to see the big picture, we will continue to delegate ministry to others and train and equip them and release them, then the whole multitude can be fed. If we don't, we'll get hard hearts and we'll burn out. That is not God's will. I believe God's will is for us to keep growing. It's God's will for our churches to keep growing. To keep growing. That always doesn't mean numerically. It can mean spiritually. It can mean financially. There's all kinds of ways a church can be growing. But anything that's alive will be growing. It's only the things that are dead that stop growing. And so God's will is for us to grow. These are the principles I see in this story, principles of church growth from the feeding of the 5,000.